When I was 8 years old, I started flying model radio-controlled aircraft, and a few months ago, I just landed a real jet for the first time. Does flying those little toy planes help you to fly full-scale ones? That's what we are gonna find out. This is Flo. Welcome to Foredeck. When I got my first model aircraft for Christmas 2007, my dad told me that he wanted to do the first flight because he thought I would crash it. So he did, but he crashed it. After a little bit of a super glue and some time in a workshop, we fixed it back up and he would let me on the controls. And this was what sparked my interest in aviation, this and the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2004. The same aerodynamic principle. First off, physics are physics, and the principles of flight regarding an aircraft are more or less the same, independent of aircraft size. Also, planes crash for more or less the same reasons. Mistakes you'll make in your model aircraft are typically not deadly, as long as you're not flying into someone's face. However, errors made in a real aircraft can swiftly escalate to life-threatening situations. Thankfully, I've never tip-stalled a real aircraft on short final, but I stalled my RC aircraft countless times. Its super glue and some hot water always fixed the problem. What I've learned from the hobby. When I was 8 years old, I didn't think much of stalls or angle of attack or airspeed. I just knew that at a certain altitude, with a certain airspeed and power setting, the aircraft would fly. However, very early on I got the concept of stability, the sense of gravity, and all things involved in flying. When I strapped my digicam on my first aircraft, I knew there was going to be some added weight, wind resistant, and some changes in sense of gravity. I realized quickly that climbing to my desired altitude would take longer than usual, and that for the landing a higher airspeed is required due to the added weight and worsened aerodynamics. I didn't think much of those things before the flight. Nonetheless, I experienced it firsthand when first trying it out. This was me understanding the concept of lift, drag, and thrust without even noticing it. After I started studying for the ATP theory and especially principles of flight, I much more appreciated the little experience I gained from flying and building model aircraft. The biggest learnings are your mistakes. Underestimate of sense of gravity. The hobby can get quite expensive. One time I crashed my foamy Cessna 182 right after rotation. The battery compartment was crammed with all the electronics inside, but I managed to squish the battery in somehow. On this fateful day though, the location of the battery shifted to the rear, and this was pretty much noticeable right after the rotation. But on that one tragic last flight, I took off, and straight after rotation the battery must have shifted to the back, which pushed the sense of gravity limits out of range at which I would have enough elevator authority at this low of an airspeed. The plane took off, fell nose down back into the ground, and broke into halves. This is only one of many learnings you will have when flying RC airplanes. This was years before I started my professional career in aviation, so I could not have known it any better. After that Cessna 182 crash, I didn't have any planes left to fly, as all of them either crashed or I sold them. 5 years later, during my IFR training, I bought myself a new aircraft, this time a Cessna 152. Why? Well, I didn't get to fly a lot because of icing. In our DA40s, we didn't have any anti-ice or de-ice capability. I didn't care about ice on my foamy Cessna 150 though. And usually, ice is not a problem unless you would fly into clouds. It was another desperate winter day with low clouds and snow. I performed some touch and goes on a snow-covered football field, and the tires kicked up ice and snow every time I touched down. With every landing, more ice and snow accumulated on the horizontal stabilizer. After 5 or 6 landings, the tail ended up so heavy that I almost lost complete elevator authority. Now, having so much ice on the tail of a real aircraft is very unlikely, but still this taught me the power of lever arm and sense of gravity shift, which in fact can be a real problem in real aircraft. In the Embraer 195 which I fly, which is a red version of the E170, in certain situations we sometimes have to take up on 2.5 tons of ballast fuel to keep the aircraft within its sense of gravity limits. And on days when many business class guests board the aircraft, 2 seats stay empty in each row, plus usually less baggage in the forward cargo hold of the aircraft. We either have to load sandbags in the forward cargo hold or fuel. The longer the aircraft, the more of a problem this could be, if not carefully calculated with a load and trim sheet. Slipping into the turn. Another thing I've learned during the flying of small aircrafts is that you should never slip into a turn. What I mean by that is sometimes with single engine piston pilots come in high and fast. This is by no means unsafe, the opposite is true. There are situations where this is the preferred way to approach an aerodrome. For instance, if you have an engine failure, you want to come in slightly higher and faster because you only have one shot at this. We train that on a regular basis in our flight school. Either we or our flight instructor would pull the power of the engine, and we then have to glide back to the runway and manage the traffic pattern without an engine. The best course of action is to come in with a little bit of extra altitude, as losing altitude is always an option, but gaining not so much, especially with an engine failure. On short final, you would typically come in slightly high. To deplete your excess energy, you have to side slip your aircraft. Depending on the type of engine and fuel system, there may be different sides of side slip which are preferred by the operator's manual. What you should never do is point your nose into the turn though. This could very easily lead to a stall spin scenario, so never do this in a real aircraft. But on a little foamy, it hurts nobody. That's what's so beautiful about flying those little RCA planes, because you could do things, and you will do things, that are just not possible or simply outright dangerous in a real aircraft, and learn from those things as mentioned above. The aerodynamic differences. Aerodynamics are immensely complicated. I'm not the one, and this is not a place to explain any of that, but what's important to realize is that the aircraft do not scale linear due to various factors. Most aerodynamic formulas involve the term speed squared. When you decrease the speed by half, the lift and drag reduces to a quarter. Reducing a plane's wingspan by half also diminishes its wing area to a mere quarter. Consequently, a model flying at half speed and half size only generates 1/16th of the lift. Consider the Reynolds number. Airflow over a surface transitions from laminar to turbulent based on speed, disregarding density and viscosity. A smaller, slower model experiences more laminar flow compared to a full-sized aircraft. More laminar flow means a later separation of the boundary layer and different stall characteristics. Imagine creating a model aircraft half the size of the real aircraft. In this scenario, the model aircraft at half the size would exhibit the following characteristics compared to its full-size brother. Its wingspan would be half that of the full-size aircraft. The wing area would be a mere quarter of the standard size. The mass would shrink to an eighth of the original. Interestingly, this results in a counterintuitive outcome. The model possesses a greater surface area per unit volume. This means it has more wing area relative to its mass. There are so many things you could do with a real aircraft. So many things not possible, or at least not recommended in a real aircraft. It will give you some of the same traits that a real aircraft has, like center of gravity, mass and lift, thrust and drag, stall spins, ballooning or control reversal. If you only know half of those subjects, follow me on this channel to learn more about them. It will give you a good idea of how an aircraft generally handles. It will teach you in so many different ways the do's and don'ts of flying an aircraft. While something like Microsoft Flight Simulator will definitely give you a more practical and broader view of what it's like to fly in a real aircraft, flying toy planes will always have a special place in my heart. Until the next one, stay safe.